Steak for breakfast. Elizabeth O'Connor. Chapter 1. A New Beginning. Danny brought the car to a halt on the summit of the range. He threw out his arm in a gesture that included the miles upon miles of undulating blueness, the heat haze, the blank, hard sky. "Well, there it is, dear, our new home." I moved my feet on the floor of the utility truck, where they had become entangled with a jar of baby food, a small basin, a blue bunny, a pink rattle, and a heap of wet napkins. I lifted the hot, sleeping baby from my aching right arm to my left arm, then, trying to look more enthusiastic than I felt, followed with my eyes the general direction of my husband's pointing finger. One long, blue hill looked much the same as another to me. I could see no signs of civilization anywhere. "Shouldn't be more than 70 miles from here," said Danny. "Be there soon after dark by the look of that sun." Now that I took the trouble to notice, the sun was moving down that cruel sky. Golden bars of heat struck through the windscreen of the car, so that I was forced to drape one of Robert's few remaining clean napkins as a shield for his poor, red little face. I tried not to think of Shady Springs, because then the lump in my throat became almost unbearable. It had been our home for the first year of our marriage, Danny's first management. I loved the spreading coolness of the mango trees, the heavy festoons of bougainvillea, which in another month would be in bloom, and nowhere else would one see those thick whitewashed walls made of basalt and ant-bed. And now we had left Shady Springs forever. As Danny put it, we were going on to bigger and better things, for Silver Ridge was 1,200 square miles of rough country, running 16,000 head of cattle, farther into the Gulf, farther into the heat, and farther into the unknown. I looked down in panic at my 3-month-old baby. I'd been bred in the town, and Shady Springs had been kind to me, a gentle introduction to the north. Danny guided the car cautiously down the steep gravel road. We crossed the railway line, past the camp of a sleeper cutter, and as the sun went down behind the hills, drew into the little terminal town, the end of the railway into the Gulf. It was here that Robert decided to make his presence known. As we pulled up outside the local pub, he struggled upright in my arms, looked about him with bleary-eyed wonder, and let out a series of shrieks that frightened a herd of goats nearby, and brought the publican's wife hurrying to the door. She nodded briefly to Danny, whom she had met before. He had been this way 2 weeks ago, on his first visit to Silver Ridge. She took the baby into her own capable arms, and led me kindly into the back parlor. These hotels of the Gulf could have been lifted straight out of a border town, American film, relics of the boom days of gold mining. They still held within their gloom the atmosphere of the early part of the century, a gloom partially dispersed at night by soft yellow lamplight. There was the bar, its worn counter polished by contact with countless elbows, a great wooden barrel resting at one end, the gaily painted beer handles, the pictures of long-forgotten race horses, the spotted mirrors, the creaking stairs, the mice scuttling in the walls, and always, of course, the inevitable back parlor, where I now sat in this age of atom bombs and sulfa drugs, surrounded by wicker work, and plush with Gibson girls, laughing at me from their dusty frames. "Would you care for some beer?" asked Miss Williams doubtfully. "I wouldn't say it was real cold-like, but it might perk you up a bit." I guessed I needed perking up, so I sat and drank a glass of warm flat beer, while Miss Williams rocked the baby. "You don't feed him yourself," she said, glancing down with what I imagined was contempt at my basket overflowing with bottles, measuring spoons and tins. I shook my head in shame. "No, I'm afraid I fell down on the job." "Pity." She drew her finger across Robert's puckering forehead. "Do you ever give him a drop of gin? Breaks the wind like, and makes them sleep real good." Shades of the clinic sister in her crisp white veil, shining enamel, glittering nickel, posters of rosy children drinking orange juice, weight cards, measuring tables, vitamin tablets. I put down my empty glass and picked up the basket in which every tin, bottle, and spoon seemed to rattle loudly to add to my discomfiture. No breastfeeding, no gin. I could read the opinion in Miss Williams' eyes as clearly as though she had spoken. However, she very kindly nursed the baby while I mixed his feed, after which he settled down to sleep on the plush sofa, while Danny and I had our supper. I was to learn to call it this. The evening meal, whether of 3 courses or a light tea, was always supper. The night was upon us before we left the little town. At our moment of departure, Miss Williams ran to the car and pushed a small bottle into my hand. "Gin," she said, in a sibilant tone. "Try it if he wakes. Never travel without it myself. It's a long road ahead of you." 20 miles farther on, we came to another town. Our town. I must say it received us without undue enthusiasm. Here and there a light glimmered. The wide, dusty street was deserted even of goats. We could have been in the middle of the plains of Tibet. The darkness was thicker than ink. Danny must go to the post office to collect mail, and of course, as soon as the car stopped, Robert started. Wail after wail rent the unfriendly darkness of the town. "Oh well," I thought resignedly, "at least everyone will know that the new manager for Silver Ridge has passed through with his wife and infant." "Can't you stop the kid?" said Danny fiercely as he pushed a bundle of letters and papers onto my feet. "Stop him yourself," I snapped. Hell indeed, thought I, draping Robert over my shoulder and unavailingly patting his back. To hell with husbands and babies, and heat, and strange dark towns, and to hell with Silver Ridge. Something clinked at my feet, and I remembered the gin, and that is how Robert came to have his first tot of mother's ruin, and gulped it down like an old hand too. I mixed it with a little of his boiled water in the bottom of a cup, and held it to his lips. He coughed, spluttered, gave a long shuddering sigh, and miraculously settled down to sleep. "Liked it, the little devil," said Danny, grinning. Then with a glance at me, "Could do with a drop yourself." For at last the lump that had been in my throat all day began to dissolve. I wept without shame into my dusty handkerchief. I sniffed and overflowed with such abandon that I failed to notice when we had left the town many miles behind. Danny just let me be. No doubt he thought it best to let me get it over with and done. We were well on our way when I gave my nose its final blow, wiped my eyes, and decided to take notice. Not that there was much to take notice of, except the bumps. One got a swift impression of dark trees, sometimes a fence, and a grid loomed up unexpectedly under the headlights of the car. Once a dingo crossed our path, turning to face us for a second, baring its teeth in a nervous snarl, then vanishing like a sable-colored ghost into the night. The air was cooler now, though after the crisp nights at Shady Springs, it had a flatness that depressed me. "There's the evening star, Bess." Danny nodded ahead. "What's it leading us to, I wonder? Think you'll stick out, old girl?" He gave my hand a squeeze, and I was ashamed of my cowardice and tears. I had gleaned a little knowledge of what I was coming to from Danny, who had come over from Shady Springs to get an idea of the layout when the move was first suggested to him. It was a large house, with a lagoon in front. There was black house labor in the form of 6 girls and several pickaninnies. There was a white cook by the name of Mabel, who Danny said could cream potatoes better than his own mother. We bumped over mile after dusty mile, Robert blessedly doped with gin, Danny fighting a dangerous tiredness after 140 miles of driving, myself trying to arrange my back so that it would not ache, but finding it well nigh impossible. Suddenly, unbelievably, Danny said, "Lights ahead." Where there had been a wall of darkness, there were now pinpoints of brightness that grew wider like blossoming flowers, and gradually took the shape of windows and doors. We passed a phantom stockyard, springing out of the gloom, a windmill etched against the stars, a white picket fence, oleander trees. Seen from the road, with the lights behind it and the huge post supporting the upper story, Silver Ridge looked like a colonial mansion. I unlocked my back muscles, lifted my feet from the debris, and tottered like an old woman from the car. We walked up a short path from the white picket gate into a well-lit, green-cemented lounge with ferns growing in pots. From one of the canvas chairs, a tall young man was uncoiling himself. He extended his hand and gazed at me through thick horn-rimmed glasses. He was introduced to me by Danny as Harry Smith, the bookkeeper. His hand was damp and without warmth. He remarked that I must be tired, that a hot meal had been kept for us, that the cook had gone to bed, having felt poorly for the past few days, and wasn't the baby a little boomer? I murmured suitable replies to all these observations, Then Danny was leading me up a steep flight of wooden stairs and along a wide veranda to our room. I noticed with pleasure that it boasted 6 pairs of glass doors opening onto the veranda on 3 sides. On the north side, one looked down on the sloping iron roofing of the kitchen quarters, the laundry, and the downstairs septic. On the east to the windmill, the engine room, and the garden, and on the south to what was simply known as the flat and the lagoon beyond. Robert must still have been under the influence of gin. He hardly stirred as I put on his clean, cool nightgown, powdered his scarlet bottom. We dined in state, Danny and I, in a long gauzed-in dining room, with worn green linoleum on the floor, and waited on by Lucy, a black girl of about 16, with kinky hair and rolling eyes. She grinned continuously, her teeth glimmering like tombstones on a dark night. There were 2 large empty sideboards, one at each end of the room. "The silver will look nice on them," I suggested. The silver was a standing joke between us. My mother had brought it with her, at goodness knows what cost and trouble, when she came to see me at Shady Springs, shortly after Robert was born. My mother, though small in stature and soft of voice, never did things by halves. If she wanted to air the house, she would invariably wait for a strong blue mountains westerly. Then she would open the front door and the back door of our small cottage and air it in no uncertain manner. When the curtains had been blown from the rods, the flower vases toppled, and everything covered in a good layer of grit, Mother would consider we had had enough. If any germs had dared to survive after that onslaught, they could stay. When Mother came to visit us, she brought the family silver. "I think you should have it, darling, being the eldest, and living on a station." She brought it in a colossal iron-bound trunk, the type that one usually associates with headless bodies of young women floating down the Thames. This one would have comfortably accommodated 3 bodies, but instead it contained 2 large silver dish covers, a soup tureen, numerous entree and vegetable dishes, 3 elegant vases, and a rose bowl out of which I had been christened. Shady Springs was small and completely overwhelmed by the family silver. Here, on these vast sideboards in this long, cool room, it would look well. Heartened by a good meal, I gave myself up to rosy reflections. With 6 dark girls to do the work, I would be able to relax. I had visions of myself lying back in a canvas chair in the green lounge, clad in cool silk or crisp linen, waving a palm-leaf fan, sipping long frosty drinks, and listening to the soft black feet of my servants as they went about their work. A pleasant little dream it was. I smiled at Danny as we left the dining room, and once more climbed the stairs to our room. I fell asleep in a huge iron 4-poster bed, hung with mosquito net. I felt very Mem-Sahib indeed. Chapter 2. Black Labor. A form materialized dimly beyond my mosquito net. A high, toneless voice was repeating with the persistence of an insect, "You're wake, missus, you're wake." But it's still night time, I thought irritably. I felt as though someone had been hitting me all over with a sledgehammer. I turned to my spouse, only to find he was not there. Still semi-conscious, I struggled through yards of white net, poked out my head, and saw that what I had mistaken for moonlight was the sickly pallor of dawn. Lucy stood beside my bed, with a cup of tea balanced in one hand, and a plate of toast in the other. She was standing on one leg like a crane, and scratching her ankle with long prehensile toes. I relieved her of the cup and plate, thus enabling her to scratch her head as well. And Mrs. Cook been say to tell you she been feel real crook. She say she sorry like. She reckon it must have been them brains what she ate. Oh, I sipped my strong sweet tea without relish. Then as the importance of this bit of news was borne upon me, who then is cooking the breakfast? Well, Bert had been knock up some steak and porridge for the bubba too. Who, I asked, through a mouth full of toast that tasted like flannelette. Who is Bert? Well, Bert a been camp cook like. Camp cook. Oh yes, it was good of him to take over. Tell Mabel I will be down to see her as soon as I am dressed, and tell Bert not to worry too much about the porridge. Baby doesn't have it yet. Yes, Mrs. And Mrs.? Yes, Lucy? Mrs., would you please tell that bloomin' Aggie she gotta help me with the dishes. She been gettin' too tired to move off her fat bum. I sank back weakly on my pillow. These domestic trials so early in the morning, and so soon after my arrival, I felt were just a little too much. I will see you all after breakfast, I murmured faintly. And now will you bring me a jug of boiling water? It must be boiling, so that I can mix Robert's feed. Okay, said Lucy, unexpectedly lapsing into an Americanism. She flashed her ghoulish teeth, rolled her eyes, and left me to chew over her early morning news bulletin. By the time I had dressed Robert, fed him, and clothed myself, the sun was sending in its first weak rays across the veranda. I wended my way downstairs, and after first walking into the men's bathroom, then through a maze of dusty, apparently unused rooms, I arrived in some confusion at the kitchen door. Bert was tall and bald-headed and unsmiling. He wore an athletic singlet, gabardine jodhpurs, a bleached calico apron, and tennis shoes. He nodded to me briskly. "Mornin', missus." Then he leant out of the window and yelled, "If yer don't hurry up with them ruddy dishes, yer won't get no breakfast." I appreciated the fact that he had modified his language for my benefit. I endeavored to make my little speech. "It's awfully good of you to take over like this. I just don't know what." "Will the boss come and ask me like?" He hurled a frying pan into the sink and slammed a lid on a kettle. And I says to Harry, I wouldn't see the boss stuck, not with the musterers in and all. Bert whisked a plate of toast out of the oven, like a conjurer extracting rabbits from a hat. Then he advanced to the door, said pardon, and proceeded to clang loudly with a lump of iron on a length of bore casing. Any more words that I might have spoken would have been no avail against this wild clamoring. I gave up and found my way to Mabel's room. There lay Mabel, with too many blankets heaped upon her inert form, and a face like a rising moon. Even to my unpracticed eye, it was obvious. Our wonder cook had the measles. There were 3 of us at the inside breakfast table: Danny, myself, and the bookkeeper. As Bert's steak required much concentrated chewing, conversation did not flow too freely. Danny had been up since 4:30, working in the yards with the men. He was taciturn, to say the least of it. Someone, he supposed, would have to drive Mabel 40 miles into the district hospital. "That will be your job, Harry, okay?" "She's apples," replied Harry, looking as though he had been given the death sentence. "And Bert will have to remain in the kitchen," Danny continued, turning to me. "I can ill afford it, mind you. The men go out today. It's hard for them without a cook. We are short-handed too. I don't suppose you could manage, Bess?" I replied that I definitely could not, what with all the unpacking to be got through, and not knowing the lie of the land or anything. Anyhow, I said hopefully, Mabel shouldn't be long now that the spots are out. A fortnight at the most, I imagine. The truth was that at the time I was quite incapable of doing station cooking. My efforts at home had been confined to cheese straws and little iced cakes. Bread baking was a mystery I had not yet explored. At Shady Springs we had a gem of a cook called Miss Blossom. She had shown a motherly concern for me all through my pregnancy, driven by my conscience and the knowledge that some day I would have to do it. I had once or twice suggested to Miss Blossom that I make a batch under her direction, but she would only shake her head and reply in horrified tones, "Not in your condition, love." We had grown fond of Miss Blossom and of her cooking, so that when Danny first heard of our transfer, we tried to persuade her to come with us, but she had shaken her head emphatically. No farther into the Gulf would she go. Too much heat and flies, and too many of them black niggers for her liking. We had nearly finished our breakfast. Danny leant back, rolling a cigarette. I toyed with a piece of toast, while Harry sipped at his tea in a dejected manner, every now and again glancing at his watch. No doubt he had in mind his 40-mile drive with the measles case. I heard the soft thud of feet upstairs, and the next minute a high thin wail of terror from Robert, whom I had left playing quietly in a cot that had been conveniently left by the wife of some former manager. What could be happening? Someone was pinching him, frightening him, trying to steal him away from me. Anything was liable to happen in this strange, wild place, full of cranky cooks, plague-ridden cooks, and grinning black girls. Nothing like this ever happened at Shady Springs. Robert could be left alone for an hour or more. Anger and terror and an awful sort of loneliness assailed me all at once. I took the stairs 2 at a time. There, on the wide sunlit veranda, the strangest sight met my gaze. Leaning over my protesting infant, dangling his rattle, and talking to him with a shrill cackle of sound, was the most grotesque little figure I had ever seen. "It's old Minnie Lopdale," said Danny, who had followed me up. "Minnie Lopdale, indeed. more like a female Rumpelstiltskin than anything I could think of. Her hair was quite white, cut short, with a fringe falling like a tattered curtain across her forehead. Her sultana-colored eyes peered at me shrewdly from behind steel-trimmed spectacles. She had a broad, flat nose, and a wide, toothless mouth, and a squat, fat body from which projected the thin arms and legs of the true aboriginal. She held out her hand and spoke like a duchess. "Miss O'Connor," she said with the greatest aplomb, "I'm so glad to meet you." Minnie proved to be a never-ending source of amazement, amusement, and revulsion to me. She and her old husband, Diamond, belonged to Silver Ridge. They had been there many years, and lived in a hut of their own down by the swamp. Minnie had been brought up and had spent her youth with well-to-do and much-traveled people. She had adopted the refined speech of her late mistress. "I am frightfully worried about poor little Lucy," she would say, adjusting her glasses and smoothing her dirty, misshapen garments. "Or you must find the heat very trying, Miss O'Connor. Yes, indeed." She was very dirty and smelt horrible, a fact that she tried to disguise by sprinkling herself liberally with eucalyptus. The combination of eucalyptus and unwashed body is beyond description. I was angry and a little short with her now for frightening the baby. She must at once have sensed my indignation, for she backed away down the veranda, drooping and puckering her lips, and waving her strange little talon of a hand at Robert. Among other things, Minnie was a superb actress. She looked so pathetic that I felt sorry for her and called her back. "Minnie, I want to see all the girls, to find out their names and what their duties are." "I'll get them together for you," she said quickly. "They'll be finished their breakfast now. The lazy good-for-nothings. You may have trouble at first, Miss O'Connor. They need a woman to straighten them up. Yes, indeed." She turned on her flat, broad feet, and waddled away. Well, I breathed at Danny. Of all the queer little people, she's like a gnome. And that accent, wherever did she get it? And Danny, the cook, seems a bit queer too, slamming things about and hardly speaking to me. Danny laughed, reducing me to the status of little woman, which filled me with annoyance. "Bert's all right, only he's not used to women. Beware of old Minnie, though. She's as shrewd as they're made of, so they tell me, and a bit of a mischief-maker, too." With these few encouraging words, he left me to cope with my first day at Silver Ridge. I now had a few minutes to look about me. The sun was well up, making clear-cut shadows across the flat, and touching the long dry grass, turning it to a soft mauvish gray. It flickered on the lagoon, and on the smooth leaves of the bahanias. The world seemed saturated with this clear early morning light, and I saw how the place may have come by its name. We were fortunate to have come at this time of the year, for it was nearing the end of May, and the worst of the heat had passed. The flies had gone too, and it was only at night that a few venturous mosquitoes cruised about in the cool air. It is all rather lovely, I thought grudgingly, looking out over the trees and up the dusty winding road. All the quiet silver and pastel dryness of that wide landscape did something to me in that moment. With a flash of intuition, I knew that life here would not be all squalor and heat and domestic upheaval, but beauty as well, if I cared to find it. The moment died. I put Robert gently back in the cot and pushed him out of the sun that was becoming fiercer as the day grew older. I turned to go upstairs, the wistful magic fading as I went. It completely vanished as I faced my black staff, shepherded together by Minnie, who hovered about, looking spiteful and sucking her gums in anticipation of much trouble to come. As she spoke each girl's name, she gave its owner a not too gentle push in my direction. They all seemed a bit afraid of her. There were 6 women, including Minnie. I noticed in surprise that they varied greatly in color, from a light gold to a chocolate brown and then to black. Minnie was black, the blackness accentuated by the startling whiteness of her hair. Aggie was a young half-caste. She was very fat, and looking at me with eyes like huge brown pansies, she gave a soft, lazy smile. Mary Ann was thin and witch-like. She wore her hair smoothed down with much oil on either side of her small, hungry face. Martha was more my idea of the typical black gin. She could have stepped straight out of the funnies in any Australian paper. She was gaunt and strong, with long, thin legs and great, flat feet. Her hair was tousled and dusty. A few lonely, discolored teeth stuck up in the wide cavern of her mouth. A whimpering baby was hitched nonchalantly on her hip. Her breast hung like withered fruit, scarcely hidden by her ragged dress. Pearlie was pretty, with many bangles. She hung her head and turned in her toes when I spoke to her. Then, of course, there was Lucy, who by this time was becoming an old friend. She was still rolling her eyes and flashing her amazing teeth. Beyond this bizarre group were 8 Pekingese, varying in age from 10 years to 14 months. They all had dirty noses, and none of them wore pants. "Well, girls," I said uncertainly. I sounded more like Miss Bloggs addressing the 4th form at St. Anne's than Miss O'Connor reviewing her black staff. "Well, girls, I know you will all work well for me. That is, I hope. I know we will all get on very well. This sort of thing might go over well at St. Anne's, but I could see that it cut no ice here." The silence was appalling. I blundered on, feeling a prickly sensation at the back of my neck, and a clamminess in the palms of my hands. "Now, Aggie, I understand that you help Lucy with inside washing up. Is that so?" "Just what you say, missus." She flashed a look of venom at Lucy from her pansy eyes. I turned hastily to Martha, who spoke with a voice as deep as a man's. "I been kitchen girl. I work longa cook, see?" So that was that. Her tone was heavy with insolence. I was too inexperienced, too uncertain of my ground to do anything about it. I saw that Minnie was regarding me with her shrewd eyes. In them I read contempt and a malicious amusement. Mary Ann was meek and spoke with a quick eagerness. She did the washing and ironing and kept the laundry in order. Pearlie, of the many bangles, was upstairs girl. I was glad to hear this. I liked her clean prettiness. She was mission bred, and could read and write. They varied in speech, as much in color and appearance. Minnie's accent would have fitted into my mother's drawing-room. Martha and Mary Ann spoke the lazy pidgin English of the aboriginal. Aggie spoke the language of any illiterate Australian, with her comin' and goin', and her some think and not think. Pearlie had adopted the school English of the mission, and Lucy was a mixture of pidgin and American slang. It took me a week to sort out the Pekingese. Martha had 5, 4 at foot, and 1 on hip. Aggie had 2, both pansy-eyed and honey-colored, and very sweet underneath the dirt. Mary Ann, of the meek, hungry looks, had 1 little Alfred. Little Alfred was to become my cross. His long and yearning cry of "Missus, I want your," will haunt me till I die. Having dealt with the servant problem, or at least dealt with it as far as I was able, I turned my attention to Mabel, who was really very sick indeed. She was dressed and ready for the trip when I came to her room. Her hectic appearance was enhanced by a magenta-colored scarf, tied peasant fashion about her head. She had a small fiber suitcase on the bed, in which she said she had packed all the necessaries. She was most apologetic as I led her over to the waiting car. "Just as you've come, and everything," she said miserably. "I was going to do you up a turkey for Sunday too." Harry was waiting for her, with an expression like Sidney Carton, about to go to the guillotine. "It is a far, far better thing," I murmured tritely, but he did not flicker an eyelash. As they moved off, Mabel leant towards me and muttered through fevered lips, "Mind that yellow piece. She's the tiredest thing on 2 legs you've ever seen." Yellow piece. I had always associated the word yellow with Orientals. I had noticed nothing slanty-eyed in the little group I had just interviewed. Don't tell me there's another one, I thought. I had visions of a smooth-faced, enigmatical Chinese maiden hidden somewhere in this labyrinth of outbuildings and iron-roofed shanties. I decided to question Bert, and at the same time to get myself on a more sociable footing with him. I found him sitting on the back steps, relaxed after his battle with the breakfast. A loose damp cigarette clung to his lower lip. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance. In the kitchen, Martha was slapping things about in the sink. She had disengaged the baby from her hip. It sat on the floor, chewing onion skin and whimpering. Every few minutes she would turn to it and bawl, "Stop that bellerin', can't yer?" I began timidly, "Bert, is there another girl about that I haven't seen? Mabel said something about a yellow girl, Chinese or something." Bert looked at me and actually smiled. "Yellow," he said. "Yellow piece. Half-caste. That'll be Aggie." It was then that I learnt that in the Gulf, yellow meant half-breed, whether half-white, half-Malay, or half-anything. A half-caste woman is always a yellow piece. One never heard of a black piece, or for that matter, a white piece. But a half-caste was a piece. Encouraged by Bert's smile, I assumed my Messahib manner. "And now about the meals, Bert." He spat out the remainder of his cigarette and cut in on my girlish dreams. "They killed this mornin', missus. That'll mean fresh meat all day. Liver and brains, and a bit of chuck. Like for lunch, and I'll do up a roast for inside, and the men's table tonight. The blacks have the rib bones. Old Minnie does them over an open fire." There I stood, completely routed. I didn't even have the courage to mention dessert. As it happened, we had blancmange and prunes, which proved to be rather a favorite of Bert's. As Harry remarked, in a lugubrious tones, "Tonight we get blancmange and prunes, and tomorrow we get prunes and blancmange." The day passed quickly enough. There was much to be done. Unpacking and sorting, getting Robert's own small cot unloaded from the back of the utility, finding my way about this huge, neglected house, sending a telegram to my mother and one to Miss Blossom, whose last words had been, "Now let me know when you get there. I'll be that worried about you and the little feller." Mary Ann gathered Robert's mountainous heap of napkins and trailed off to the laundry with little Alfred in her wake. Then, of course, there was the family silver to arrange in the dining room. This drew many exclamations of amazement and delight from Lucy and Aggie, and, of course, Minnie Lopdale, who did not appear to have any particular work, and was always on the spot when there was anything novel or exciting in progress. I saw very little of Danny, who was busy getting the men off to muster some place by the name of Toby's, whoever Toby might have been. At 6 o'clock the sun went down, and with the dusk came a blessed coolness, the first soft hint of a Gulf winter. I stood on the balcony outside my room, looking down on the kitchen roof, as I had done the night before. Turning my head a little to the right, I could see portion of the store and saddle rooms. Farther down the hill towards the swamp were the blacks' quarters, half hidden by the kitchen. Beyond the laundry, on a patch of open ground, I could see Minnie Lopdale, crouched over a small fire, roasting bones. The firelight flickered on her shins and on her glasses, and turned her hair to thistledown. She looked for all the world like one of Macbeth's witches. I had a feeling, amounting almost to certainty, that if I had crept closer, I would have heard her muttering, "Lizard's leg and ballet's wing, for a charm of powerful trouble, like a hell broth boil and bubble," as the sparks flew about her, and the fat dropped and sizzled in the fire.